pretty shortly.
Where's the officer being rude to him?
No, boy, they're great. Boy, they can't read that.
Now once the train does take off, there'll be a couple things going on here, just around the corner. We're going to do a blowdown. Big steam cloud coming out the left side of Dixiana's boiler, flushing out minerals and sediment and all that stuff that gets left behind when you boil the water down. You turn it into steam. That sediment collects, settles into the boiler. So we flush it out with all the pressure, blasting the water out, turns right into steam in the atmosphere, helping to flush the minerals out with it to keep the boiler clean and operating well. And right after that, depending on the clouds and the fog, how thick the fog is still out there, we'll have a nice view of the valley, a lookout spot where you can see just up from on the left side up here. Now about the blowdown up here that we're going to do. A lot of you on the train won't have a good shot of it. That's okay. Because at the end of our train ride, coming off of the mountain, right before we return back into the depot, on a left-hand curve, we'll all have a great shot of the blowdown at the end of the trip.
What's wrong?
Now we should have that steam blowdown coming up pretty shortly, and right after that, we'll see if we can see the view. Right after that, steam off to the left.
Back on the fire line.
Now we'll reach a brief stop here shortly up at the end of our loop. I'll go hop down and reset the tracks, and we'll be right back underway.
Exactly.
Now some of you may have seen your conductor down on the left side of the train taking a little break, or inspecting the train brakes. Hear that up front, the chuff, chuff, chuff. You're going to hear a lot of that on the way down. That is the exhausting steam from our steam-powered air compressor. We use this compressed air to supply the brakes on other cars behind the locomotive. As I was sitting there by the switch watching the train roll by, it's called a roll-by inspection, looking at all the brake pistons, brake rods, the brake shoes, and all that, making sure everything's intact, doing what it's supposed to do, not broken or busted. Now we use the Westinghouse automatic air brake system, which was first introduced to railroading in the early 1870s, which is still used on most modern trains to this day worldwide. Some of you may recognize that name, Westinghouse. A lot of common household appliances, washers, dryers, stoves and ovens, and a lot more. Same guy. But Mr. George Westinghouse got his start in his career actually designing air brakes for trains.
And upsetting Thomas Edison.
Now it's a pretty fail-safe system. We use air reduction to apply the brakes. So when that compressor chucks like it's doing right now, it's recharging all the air, the entire line through all the cars. There's a continuous line of air connected by a rubber hose, pumped up to 90 psi. That holds the brakes away from the wheels. So when the engineer wants to start to slow the train or bring it to a stop, he'll start reducing the air pressure on all the cars behind him. If he needs to come to that emergency stop, he'll drop all the air out of the system. We'll come to a grinding halt. Now, in case the train were to uncouple itself, someone pulls the pin or whatnot, for any reason the cars let go and we lose all the air, any reason we were to lose the air on this train, instead of a runaway, you come to a nice screeching halt. Because back in the early days, it was the opposite. They used to add air to stop the train in the very beginning, and that worked great, but they oversaw that major design flaw. You lose the air, you lose all your brakes. And there were a lot of runaways early on. So by the late 1870s, the air reduction system, and it's been almost unchanged since that time, still used today.
That's where it must have gone.
Now for those of you seated on the right-hand side of the train, here's your shot of the burned out trestles from up above. Down on the right side of where Dixiana is now, you'll get the shot. Now since the 1870s, these air brakes have saved countless lives and made railroading a much safer place. Prior to this, before the time of air brakes, there was just manual brake application and there was no radios, so the brakeman, the crew on the train, would listen to certain whistle commands from the engineer. Now before the 1870s, if you were logging around here, they would use these big, huge flat cars to load up all the lumber, chain the big logs down on the flat cars. So the brakeman's job back in that time period was hopping one car to the next. To do so, he'd have to hop log to log to get to those brake wheels and manually crank them down in time before the train was out of control. And if he made one wrong step, flipped off that log and fell in between the cars, that was the end of his career. That was the case quite a bit. In the 1880s, about 10 brakemen or crewmen on the railroad would die every week just in the United States alone. Railroading was the second most dangerous job you could have back then, right next to coal mining. Now a brief stop. We're going to back this train down the switchback.
You see, this is bad smoke. Like good old coal smoke.
We did.
Yeah.
On the train with you.
Yeah.
backing up so we can go down there. Remember how we go and then we switch back?
This is where it used to go.
Now here in the Golden State, we have two different state trees. You're pretty familiar with this one so far, the coast redwood, Sequoia sempervirens. Now our second state tree, which is very closely related to this one here. We usually drop a little cushion of a bunch of small trees as a bedding for the big one to land on. Drop it down right where he wants it. An entire trunk hits the ground, stays solid, doesn't break, and 100% of great lumber with super tight grain and free of knots.
Still reminds me I want a table.
What?
Now the third type of redwood was thought to have been extinct. Until 1944 it was rediscovered, growing remotely in the People's Republic of China. Now that tree is called the dawn redwood, or the meta sequoia. Only lives about 300 years max, and will reach a height of about 140 feet at its best. Doesn't really compare to these types of trees here, these two sequoias of California. But the big difference is it's a deciduous tree, whereas these here are evergreens. So in China, the dawn redwood is just a bare, bald, red stick every winter. And it's one of the three survivors of the mighty sequoia family, which are basically the last of a dying breed. As a species, fossil records indicate that sequoia trees have existed for about 240 million years before flowers or feathered birds. And fossils also tell us back then that there were at least 50 different species of sequoia trees worldwide. Now we're down to only 3, and that's because of our last modern ice age. What is now North America used to be a covered continent full of redwood forests, and now it stands right here at the coastline only, on the final stand of redwoods.
Did you get that?
Yeah.
Where that fog rolls nice and thick. Where the fog rolls, the redwood grows. And that's it.
111.
Oh, the hot air from you. Like you did yesterday, squealed and ran back from the water. Not squealing.
Yeah, 9-year-old squeal.
Now here in these Santa Cruz Mountains, we generally go on a real wet, rainy winter seasons. In a few months throughout our winter, get about 60 to 90 inches on average of rainfall, sometimes much more, sometimes heavy drought. But more often than not, what we can count on throughout the dry seasons when it's not raining almost every day is that heavy marine layer from the Pacific Ocean, that thick coastal fog. It'll build up overnight, make its way up to these hills by the early mornings, and hang out till the sun burns it off. As that heavy fog layer passes through the canopy of the redwood forest, the higher up the trunk you go up the redwood tree, the tinier the little needles get up high. Now those little needles at the top are excellent condensers of the moisture trapped in the fog. They don't absorb the water, but they condense it and form water droplets. And it'll fall down to the forest floor as fog drip, which waters the shallow, ancient roots of the big trees here. And the fog rolls in, condenses and drips down to water the shallow roots, supplying the forest with up to 40% of its moisture year-round. And the only reason as a species, the coast redwood is not yet extinct. All right, now we've got just one more stop to make, right at the edge of the forest up here. I'll line the switch, we'll go back into the station. And right after we start rolling, after we leave the forest, up front on the left side will be that big steep blowdown like we did up top. This time more steam and a better angle for everyone. You don't want to miss it. We're going to flush out all those minerals to hit the blowdown coming up shortly.
Drag line. You're supposed to have all the brains. What sort of buckets are those?
Ready or not, here it comes. Good weight. There's home. How's that for a serenade speed?
And they got cooked duck.
That's all, folks. Now please have a seat.
What sort of buckets are those?
I'd like to thank you for joining us here at the camp, teaming away with us to those beautiful redwoods. If you guys had a good trip, my name is Don, and I've been your conductor today. If you didn't have a good trip, my name is not important, and you're on board Amtrak.
Poor Amtrak.
After you guys get off the train, if you have any questions or comments for me, feel free to come find me near the back end, dressed in the black and white, just like a penguin. And I got Georgie's Cookhouse. A restaurant is open if you've worked up an appetite or a sweet tooth for the ice cream or the milkshake. And your souvenir awaits on a general store. Lots of great merchandise in there. That is, please wait for this train to fully stop. Once Dixiana lines up under that water tower, she'll give you one last toot on that whistle when it's safe to deboard the train. Wait for it.
Sean, what's that under there?
All right.
Any unnecessary please don't leave it on our bench or stand over the trying to find a seat. Please put any personal luggage underneath that seat. The train's got 3 vertical steam cylinders, all mounted on the right-hand side of the machine. None of that's on the left. Those 3 cylinders are pushing 3 big pistons up and down that have a 10-inch bore with a 12-inch flow.